Web3 or Web 3.0 is all the rage right now. It seems like people are moving away from centralized systems, citing concerns about data ownership, digital privacy, trust, and a perverse ads-driven commercial model that just isn't right for the average guy. So this combined with the whole movement for individual sovereignty is the fertile ground for a new kind of apps known as decentralized apps or dApps. So this video, we're going to talk about Web3, and if you look at Wikipedia, Web3 says here it's an idea for a new ideation of the World Wide Web based on blockchain technology, which incorporates concepts such as decentralization and token-based economics. And this is the definition of decentralized application. It's an application that can operate autonomously, typically through the use of smart contracts. And we learned how to write smart contracts in a previous playlist. I can link to that. There is, I think, altogether 7 videos. We're going to go through how to create a smart contract, write Solidity code, and then deploy that on a live blockchain. So we're not going to cover that anymore. What we're going to do today is going to actually go ahead and create a Web3 application. So we're going to go ahead and build a real-world app, a decentralized app with React and web3.js. So I have here React open, and this video is not going to actually cover the know-how of blockchains and decentralized systems, because I'll just link you to that video. You can learn more about that, learn how to create a smart contract on your own. Instead, what we're going to do is to see how to build online solutions using React and using web3.js. So that's another thing that we're going to go into, web3.js library. So there's another thing that we're going to talk about, this web3.js. This is Ethereum JavaScript API. We're going to use this too to create online solutions for our customers, for users, for clients, to guarantee them better ownership. One hallmark of a dApp is that there is no central authority. There is no central party that can come in there and maybe provision account or take away account, right? You use your Web3 wallet to transact, to log in, to vote, to perform transactions, and nobody can take that away from you. So with this video, I want to show you how to make a centralized application from scratch. We're gonna download React, and we're gonna start from there. We're gonna cover the tools. We're gonna try to learn how to set up our tools, write our code in React using JavaScript or ES6. ES6 stands for ECMAScript 6, and then we're gonna link to a Web3 wallet like MetaMask. All right. So React is free and open source. It's a pretty cool front-end JavaScript framework for building user interactive UI. Right, it makes it painless to create interactive UI. So it's a really cool tool. It's initially built by Facebook, maintained by Facebook. I guess now we can call it Meta. So it's built and maintained by Meta. And the community of individual developers and companies is one of the most popular front-end library right out there. And so you want to have that. You also want to have a MetaMask wallet. And it's going to look like this. So it's going to look like this. This is a MetaMask wallet. Again, a lot of this stuff, I've covered that in earlier videos. If you want to learn more about that, you probably should pause the video, go and look at my Solidity videos and follow through that. But I'm going to assume that you have a MetaMask wallet, you have a Web3 wallet set up. If you don't have one, go to MetaMask, type MetaMask in there, and just search for, click on the first one, and then just set up, just download that, and then create an account if you want to, right? So it's going to assume, this video is going to assume that you have a MetaMask wallet, you have any Web3 wallet of your choice to follow along. You want to have Node.js installed on your machine to have access to this thing called npx. So want to make sure that you did like how do I install npm or Node like this. Go ahead and install Node.js and npm on your machine if it's Linux or Windows. One thing you can do as well is you can just open up, if you have a package manager like Homebrew, for example, you can do that. If you're using Linux or using Ubuntu, for example, you can also probably do app install. So the way to do that, if you're on a Mac and you're used to using Homebrew, you can say something like brew install Node. All right. So brew install Node would install Node for you using Homebrew. If you're on Ubuntu, you can say apt install, say Node.js. And then you just want to verify that you have all of that installed. And the way you do that, you can do a node -- version. And just want to make sure that you have one installed here. If you have Node installed, it may take you about 3 minutes. So pause the video, just wait for Node to be installed on your machine, and then come back here and resume. And you can also just do npm -- version to just confirm that you have that installed as well. Okay, we're not going to actually use npm. We're going to instead be using npx. The difference is that npx is a tool that you use to execute packages instead of actually installing them. So you execute that package, and packages used by npm are installed globally, so you have to care about pollution for the long term. What it means is that you may be installing a ton of things on your machine, and that could lead to namespaces and all these other kind of problems that down the road. But on the other hand, packages that use npx, they're not installed globally, so you don't have to be worried about the pollution problem in the long term. And so we're going to be using that. Then once you have that, you want to change directory to wherever you want to work with. You can change this into your desktop, into your Dropbox folder, into a downloads folder, wherever you want. And once you have that, go ahead and say npx create React app. Oh, you want to, yeah, npx create React app, and then just give it a name here. I'm going to call it smart ballot. So you can name it whatever you want. For this video, we're going to be using React 18. So that's going to be the latest version of React. There are a few changes here from React 16 and 17, but I'm going to point that out, and we're just going to follow best practices to meet the requirements of React 18. All right, so let's go ahead, say npx create React app smart ballot. Let's run that, and it's going to go ahead and say, oh, I'm going to create it in the current directory, which is under web3, and then it's going to call it smart ballot. That's what we want. And after a while, you see that all of that has been installed. It says success, create a smart ballot, and then npm start. So what we can do now, it says here, we suggest that you begin by typing. So now if you look at your folder, you have a ton of other directories, or maybe you have nothing. This could be on your desktop and you have other things in there. So I'm going to clear the screen, print out ls, just to make sure. It's called smart ballot. So I'm going to just say cd smart ballot, hit enter, and then I just have to say npm start, just like that. And it's going to open up the web browser, so I'm gonna have to drag this out a little bit so you can see what's in here a little bit, and you should see that it's running right now. It tells you to edit source app.js and save to reload, right? So everything is working as intended. And now I'm just gonna close that out. Now we don't need that anymore, but if you go back to your terminal, you can see that it's now running perfectly. Okay, before we move into our IDE and start to create our decentralized app or dApp, I want to ask for a favor. I want to make sure that you hit the subscribe button and share this video with anyone who's on the same learning journey as you. You ready? Let's move into our IDE and let's create our dApp. So if you want to, you can start your development server from this integrated terminal. So what you can do is to just have this in npm start. And if you want to, you can close out the other terminal and just have everything work. And if you want to, you could just turn in. And if you want to, you could actually just close off the other terminal and just have all of this done in the integrated IDE. So in here, you can open up a terminal. This is the control backtick. So control backtick, that opens up the terminal, and you can just have your development server started from here. So npm start. And now you can see that React started at localhost 3000. Okay, so let's keep it there and talk about React for a little bit. So there is a public folder. This is where you find your index.html. And within index.html, if you look at it, there is the React app. If you change this to your smart contract and you write this, say something like ballot or smart ballot, and you save that, you will see now that it's going to be reflected in the title of your browser tab. All right, so it says now smart ballot. It says here, check that there is JavaScript enabled. If you don't, then give this warning, and then you have a div id equals to root. Now where does this come from? So this is basically just HTML, right? It says div, and there is nothing in this div. The reason there is nothing in this div is that if you go into the source and you look at index.js, so let me open that up on the site, you will see that it says here that it uses JavaScript. This is just basically JavaScript. It says here, take document.getElement.id root. So if you name this root, you want it to be root. So this is the default. It says this is an ID of root, and it says get that element and inject the app in here. Okay, so this is what it's doing. Now every time there is a request to our web application, index.html is going to be boot up, but there is nothing in here. But hey, index.js is saying that, well, inject something in there. So what does it do? It says find the app and then take that, render that into root. Right now, where did this app come from? It says import app from app. So import app from app. This is actually just a shorthand to just type it out, type out the full app.js. If you have the app.js, you could just say app. If you have something like my module, you can say module. You don't have to type module.js, you can just say module. So that's also okay, right? So in this case, we just say app. And where did app.js come from? Well, here, it's here, app.js. So let's open that up, maybe onto the left. And this is where app.js is from. So if you change things here, you will see that being reflected in index.js, which is gonna then be taken and rendered directly into the root ID container itself, right? So why don't you go ahead and maybe change this out a little bit. You say smart ballot is live. All right, so there is smart ballot is live. If you save that, now you can see that it immediately renders in your browser. Smart ballot is live. So you see that now, smart ballot is live here, all right? And this is called hot reloading. So every time you make changes and you save your file, you look back in your browser, you see that the changes have taken effect almost immediately. So that's what the public folder does. It stores also the logo, the images, and the fave icon. Fave icon is basically this, the small little icon that you see next to your title in your browser tab bar, right? So let's close that out. Source is where you write all your JavaScript code. This is where you write all the React logic, your components logic. So React is a component-based UX framework. So it basically allows you to create components and then string them together and stitch them together. So in this case, all of them will be its own individual file, and then you can have subdirectories in here. We're actually going to be working mostly in this, so we're going to have plenty of opportunities to actually explore a little bit more about what this source folder does. So close that out. Git ignore is just a way, when you use create React app, one of the things it does for you is to just create this file for you, and it's just going to ignore all the files that you don't want to have in version control. So this is actually kind of neat. You don't have to go and create your own git ignore. If you don't want something to be tracked in version control, you just have to add them into this. So just add them into your own git ignore file. So this is something like your brownie config, anything in here, any kind of like secret keys and stuff like that, any files in there, you don't want them to be tracked, just add them in here. And you have package log and package.json. This is a way for you to manage your dependencies. So what are the dependencies in your project? So what are things that is required before this project could successfully boot up and run? Okay, so there are things in here. There are scripts. So every time you say npm, remember earlier we did to get this started, we said npm start. So npm start is going to look for scripts, and it's going to say, okay, you said npm start, so I'm going to find the start command. And it says, oh, I found it. It's got React script start. So where scripts coming from? Well, it's here. So it's going to run the start command from React scripts. This is not something that you want to manually configure for the most part. These are just very helpful shortcuts for you to access scripts without having to type out the whole thing. And then there's the linter, there's the browsers, and all of these other details in here in the file. But really what is most important is probably the name, the version, and the dependencies here. All right. So let's just go ahead and get started by installing one dependency, and then we'll see package.json reflecting that change. All right. So go back into terminal, and you can now stop the server if you want to. We can keep it running as well if you want to. Actually, we can also just have them side by side. So I'm just gonna use this space here. This is where I'm running the server, and go ahead and first install web3, right? So we can say npm install web3. So when you say npm install web3, what it's gonna do is it's gonna install that in the root directory of your package, and this has become the default behavior. So you no longer need to put -- save. But if you want this to be a dev dependencies, you can put -- save dev. So this is gonna say that I need this during development. I don't need this. My end users doesn't need this in order to build a project and get started running. Okay. What are common dev dependencies? For example, a formatter, a linter, all of those things. You use those to write better code, but not necessarily you don't need them to actually be in the project when you ship the project, right? You only need them because the development process relies on them. All right. So in this case here, we're not going to do any of that. We just say npm install web3, and that's just going to install web3, and then just going to add that into the package.json. And now that's done. I know that I'm also going to use useDapp, which is npm install app useDapp /core. I know that I'm going to need that in later parts of this series, right? So in future videos, we're going to use that. So I'm also going to go ahead and just say npm install useDapp core. And now it's done too. So if you prefer to work with yarn, you can use yarn and just change it to the corresponding, instead of npm install, you can say yarn add. So yarn add web3, you can do that as well. But I'm just going to stick to that. And you see that now package.json and package.json .log both have the m flag, which says that it's been modified. So if you click onto one of them, and now you look at the dependencies key, you see that useApp core has been installed, web3 has been installed. All right. And this is how I sort of verify that everything is working. So I'm going to close that out now. And I'm just going to go back to app.js. And in fact, I'm going to actually remove most of this stuff. I don't need the image. So let me close out this. We don't need this. So Control-Shift-K, delete that line. This is probably fine. But let's delete that as well. Let's also delete the A, the links, delete all of that. Let's just now we just leave with div header, right? And I'm just going to say decentralized ballot. Oh, I realized that you're not actually seeing the commands in the bottom right. So probably gonna have to move this over to the left. And what I did earlier was npm install useApp core.
and npm install web3. Let me resize the window for our browser a little bit so we can talk about this a little bit more. If you now right click and inspect element, you will see that there are, and go into the console, you see that there's a quick warning here saying that React DOM.render is no longer supported in React 18. So the latest version of React, it doesn't support that anymore. It says to use create root instead. Until you switch to the new API, your app will behave as if it's running React 17 and give you a link to learn more about that. So maybe let's fix that first, right? So basically we need to remove React DOM.render and we need to replace that with create root. All right, so let's do that. So you go into index.js and you don't need this anymore, so we could either comment that out if you want to, or we can just remove them. And what we do instead is we do const container and document.getElement by ID root, and we say const root, and const root is going to be React DOM dot create root. So this is exactly what the message is telling us in the browser, right? And we're passing container in there. The rest are just going to be okay, but we're just going to put a render because otherwise there's no point just creating the root. So we want to render something. What do we want to render? We want to render app. Okay, we're going to remove everything else. We don't need the web wider, so we're going to remove that as well. We could also choose to remove the CSS if we want to. And if you now go back to your browser, it says now you're importing create root from React DOM, which is not supported. You should instead import it from React DOM client. All right, cool. Let's go ahead now and do that change as well. Make that change as well. From client. Save that. And now it's working. Now there's no more warning message. And everything's still working as intended. Okay, we installed web3.js using npm install web3. So we need to bring that in. And the way to do that, go into app.js. Now we're not actually going to touch anything in index.js from this point on, because what index.js is really doing is really just saying that import the app, and whatever it is in the app, just render that. And render that into where? Into the element with an ID called root. And where does that exist in our file? It exists here, right? So div ID equals to root, and this is what it's saying. It's saying that, okay, find the div that has the ID called root, and then that should be your container. Create a root on that container and then render that. That's all it's saying. So index.js is really it's not something that we want to write our logic in. We just want to put all our logic in app.js instead, because those are going to be imported and then brought into index.js. And that's it. Just going to keep index.js short, simple, and close it out now. Save it and close it out. All right. So let's go back to app.js, and this is where we're going to be actually doing most of our work. Since we're no longer using logo, let's also remove that. We just have app.cs. We just have app.css. And how do we bring in a dependency? We use import. So this is a Node.js thing. You can say import web3 from web3. And that's going to bring in web3. And if you save that now, go into your browser, refresh the browser, you see now that you get a ton of prompts. The reason you're getting a ton of prompts now is that Create React App version 5, which was released also quite recently, they use Webpack version 5. So if you're using one of the later version, if you're following this tutorial, you most likely will. You need to understand that the recent version of Webpack, they drop supports for a lot of the native Node.js polyfills by default. You don't need to really know the details of what this is doing, but it says here that it doesn't include a polyfill anymore. So you either have to add a polyfill to your project dependencies by yourself, or you have to use an earlier version of React scripts. And so what I'll do is I'll use the second route. It's probably easier for you guys, so I'm just going to pick that one. And I'm going to say npm install. And now I actually want to save this into the dependencies itself. So this is when I can actually say something like save or save exact. So save exact is saying that I want exactly this version and React scripts. So React scripts 4.0.2. So that's going to change our React scripts. If you open that up right now, package.json, you see that right now it's 5.0.0. So we need to downgrade this in a way, right? So let's run that. Okay, these errors have still not gone away, but you see the package.json, now React scripts is now at 4.0.2, right? So that's the first thing. Now the second one is to just Control-C, terminate that server. Now the browser is completely gone, but we could just go ahead and just npm start again. And with a bit of luck, everything should still work. And there we go. We have smart ballot again. So that's one way of just getting rid of the polyfills error message, but another way is to just add your own, right? Anyway, you want to make sure that those things, whatever you're doing, always check your packages.json to see that your changes here have been reflected in here. So if you install a new dependency, it's going to be here. You install a dApp dependency, it's going to be in here. If you downgrade, upgrade, it's going to all be in here, right? So earlier we said npm install save exec react scripts 402, and it's going to show it here. So let's close that out as well, and let's go back into app.js again. And we're now ready to write our app logic. In React, to create a state or a variable, you will do something like this, right? You say let first name, and I'll put that to be my name, Samuel. And let's just put my name in here. And the way you do that, you put curly bracket to say, okay, now I'm escaping back into JavaScript. And then I'm going to put the name of this variable, so first name. If I save that now, you see that in the browser, you see that I have my decentralized ballot and then bracket, my name, Samuel. But what happens if I change my first name somewhere in the code? So somewhere in here, for example, I have some sort of logic, that changes first name. This will not actually be reflected in here because React doesn't know to re-render this area, this component, every time that this changes. So with React, in order to create a proper state where we can mutate that state, change that state, and still have the child components here rendering the updated state every time that changes, you need to use something called the useState. So this is a React hook. So we say import and we say useState. Let me show you what I mean by that. It's from React. And we save that. Probably want to actually put some space between them. And then what you want to do instead is you want to have this first name, you want to say something like const first name set first name. You don't always have to call them set first name, but it's a good convention that most people follow, so I'm just going to stick to that. And here you can put the default value. So default value could be my name, Samuel, and then this will still be first name, but now it's capital N. And what you can do with this is that there is now a setter to set the state. So very similar to the kind of setter-getter programming paradigm that you may have come across already. So what you want to have here is, let's just maybe add an input in here just to maybe illustrate this point a little bit better. We say this is a text input, and I'm gonna just close this out right away, and I've saved that. I see that there's a text input. What I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna just add a value in here, and I'm also gonna have the value to be the first name, but I'm also gonna actually say every time that something changed there, every time that there is a change in the input field, I want you to do something. And that something could be something like console log or anything like that. But I want to take the event, and I want to be able to say set first name e.target.value. And then let me save all of that. Let me show you what it looks like now. In the browser itself, if I go ahead and refresh the page, I can now add a value in here. And let's say this is, my name is John now. Just be John, right? Adam, Samuel, Lucas, right? So if we refresh that, it goes back to the default value because that is the default value when we initialize this state. So it says that when you first initialize, when this app first render, first name should be assigned to Samuel, but anyone could use the set first name to change the value. All right. This is not a React tutorial, so I don't want to go into too much depth on this, but I'm just going to remove that just to show you what the useState hook is really all about. All right. So I could use the same logic to say something like const account set account, and I could have the useState. I could also have no default values. So this is saying that there is no default value, right? Default value, nothing. Now it's going to complain. It says that the first name is not defined, so I want to remove all of that. Don't need this anymore. Save that. Okay, now it's gone. Compiled successfully. Cool. And since we have account, we're going to do what we did earlier. We're just going to add a p tag. P stands for paragraph, so I want to just add a paragraph tag here, and we're going to say your account just going to be account. Save that. So right now, if you look at the browser, there's nothing in here. There was no default value, hence completely empty, your account, and nothing in there, right? We can actually go ahead and say when the app first render, or first mount, so when app first mount, perform an action or do something. And the way you can do that with React is to use something called the use effect. Use effect allows you to set up some sort of effect, some sort of side effect every time something happens. You can define what the something happened through dependencies. In this case here, we're not waiting for anything to happen. We're just saying that when it first mount. So you do that by calling use effect. And use effect takes two things. So first is the effect that you want to run, and you do it like this. And the next thing is the dependency array. And the dependency array is kind of what should change here before this effect should take place. So for example, you want to say that every time that my first name is changed, you can put first name in here. So let's say you do have one called first name, and I'm going to set first name, set first name. And here you're saying that every time first name is changed, do something. This could be something like console.log. It could be something like, okay, then I want to refresh the account. I want to reset the account. I can go ahead and set account. I can go ahead and do something like console.log, which is a way of printing something into the console. Very similar to how you would use Python's print statements. So those are things you can do, or log statements, right? So use effect saying that every time first name value is changed, the value of first name is changed or reassigned. Well, you want to change, you want to perform this action in here, right? We're just going to remove that now again. And we're also going to remove this. What happens if you have an empty dependency array? If you have nothing in the dependency array, what happened? Now what happened is that it's going to just run on the first, when it first mounts. So when this component is first rendered, that's when the effect is going to run. And what do we want to have here? So we're going to actually use an asynchronous function, a sync function, and we're going to call it load accounts. You can name it anything you want, but we're going to just run this function, and we're going to just call load accounts like this. And what is in load accounts? Well, load accounts is going to be a synchronous function. So you want to actually have something like const accounts, and you want to say await. And you want to await for something to happen. So async await, this is a synchronous function. It's saying that wait for this to happen before you run the rest of the code, right? So asynchronous makes this function asynchronous, because in Node.js, otherwise it would have been a synchronous function. It would try to run everything from top to bottom, and if this is a long running process, it's not going to wait for that. It's just going to go continue on in execution. And so async await just kind of said no, halt the process, make sure that you wait for this to complete. So let's maybe, or let's leave it in here, right? So we need to have a web3 service before we can actually call this. And the way we do that is we can say const web3, and what do we want here? We want to say new web3. So new web3 is imported from here. I want to say take that, and you need to have a provider. So in this case here, we're going to actually say take web3 and find the given provider. I'll explain what that is in a second. So given provider, it says when using web3.js in an Ethereum compatible browser, it was set with the current native provider by that browser. So if you're using a browser and it supports that web3, which is here, then it will go ahead and set that. Otherwise, you can just return null, right? So if we have MetaMask, for example, that's gonna make our browser compatible with web3. All right, so let's close that out now. But otherwise, we could use a fallback. If I open up Ganache, click on Quick Start, go into the settings, look at the server, I will see that there's a host name, port number, and there's a network ID. So if we decide to run this up with Ganache, we want to maybe use that one instead. So we're going to put a fallback option and use exactly what I see from Ganache, localhost 8545. That is the port that my Ganache is running, and I'm going to just listen for that. So this is an OR operator. It's saying that first try this. If this doesn't work, right, then look at this one. Okay, so if this is working, then ignore that, but if not, just look at my Ganache. So maybe I want to do some sort of development locally, and I want to use Ganache for that. So you just have to go into Ganache, open up settings, just like what I showed you earlier, click on networks, and then look at the port, and just make sure you enter the right one here. And now that you have web3, you could now take away this, and you can say web3.edh stands for if, and request accounts. So request accounts, store them into the accounts constant. And you still need to do something with accounts. So this is where we use the set account, right? We say set account. You can pass in a function, or you can just pass in a value. So in this case here, it's just going to be a value. Just going to say set accounts. That's it. But accounts itself is an array, so we want to say take the first value. Let's just say take the first value, right? Let's save that, save it, and now open up your browser and refresh the page. You should see that MetaMask pops up asking you to log in. Okay. So let me try to close out the server again. Okay, if I refresh the page, there's nothing now. This is not working, so let me try npm run again, npm start, and open this up. It says decentralized ballot. If I'm logged in already, it just prints out my account. And if I look at it, I can confirm that it's exactly the same account. If you haven't done this, then it will pop up. If you haven't logged into MetaMask, that is, it will pop up, the MetaMask will pop up and ask you to log in. So you just have to log in and it will just print out your account. And congratulations, that's a great first step into getting web3.js into your application and making this into a decentralized application. So let's close this out now and bring this all back in. Just to show you a few more things you can do with Web3 before we end the video, we're just gonna say async, create another async function, and this time we're gonna say load balance. So again, it's gonna be a synchronous function, so we need to have some await in here as well. And what are we gonna do here? We're gonna go ahead and say const network, and we're gonna say await web3 if get network type. Well, it needs the web3, so you can either copy and paste there and just load it in like that, or we can maybe just take this out. Oops. Or we can just take this out. In the outer scope, we can remove that. So now both these functions will have access to the web3. So we don't have to copy and paste. So it's kind of good to just keep your code tidy and not repeat yourself all over the place. So we want to have web3 up here, and we're gonna say, okay, that's web3, and this is because it's on a shared scope. All right. And we're also gonna do the same thing. Actually, just gonna copy this, paste it down, and we're gonna change all of this. Balance, and this is just gonna be get balance. It's kind of meaningless to actually have this tool without actually reflecting that in the UI. They're not gonna see that anyway. So let's go ahead and maybe change that, right? So I wanna go ahead and create another paragraph. So that's the p tag again, and we're gonna say your balance. What do we want to have here? We want to say network, because I want to basically print like this is the main net, or the test net, and then I want to show the balance. But since we don't have this network and balance, it's going to give us a complaint if we try to save the file. So we need to go and make sure that network and balance exist. So what do we do here? We just have to create another state, const network, set network, use state, const balance, set balance. And if you find yourself using too much of this use state hook, one thing you can do is to combine them into a dictionary. So you can have something like, let's say, balance state, and within it you can have like your account, you can have your network, and you can have your balance. You can have all of them in one, and then you just have to use one. Instead of using 3 use state, you can just have one. So you would have const balance as, whoops. So let's maybe remove this. We can have balance, set balance, and you pass this as the default. So this could just be a let, or could be a const, but now you don't need all 3 of them. You can just have one, and then in here you want to change how you set balance. So when you set balance, you want to pass that, and you want to only set this key. You don't want to set the rest. That's one way. The other option is to have something called a use reducer, and use reducer goes like that. I'm not actually even gonna show you that because I feel like I want to keep this very focused on the smart contract and the Web3 aspect of things. I don't want to talk too much about React, but I have other videos that you can go and look for that goes into more details about React and doing all of this stuff. For now, I'm just gonna keep it to this 3 simple use state. So now this will work. Now I have the network, I have the balance, and in the browser, sure enough, I see the balance, I see the bracket, but there's nothing in there. Why is there nothing? Because we haven't actually used the setter to set the values in here. So to do that, we can go back to our function, and we can go ahead and say set network, set network. That would just be network, and set balance, and that would just be balance. Save that, and now that this function exists, what do we want to do? We want to call that function as well. So we want to copy this and do the same thing as in here, because otherwise this is just a function definition, just defining a function without actually doing it, without actually calling it. So I want to make sure that that is actually being called. So we want to pass in load balance at the bottom. So save that, and now if you go back to our browser and we refresh our page, nothing is happening. And the reason nothing is happening because the balance itself is still require an account. It still needs you to pass an account here to get that. We don't have an account passed in, and therefore it doesn't know what to do, and so it's throwing an error. So what you want is to actually pass in account. Where do we have the accounts? You can either do this, but since we already set that into the state here, account, we can just copy that and paste it in here. So account, like this. And now we pass account into the dependency array because every time account changes, you want this function to re-execute, right? So you're saying that every time the account changes, this is the dependency array. So it watch for changes in any of these variables in here. It says, okay, if account changes, you probably also want to have network change. You probably also want to have balance change. So if any of this change, you want to have this function re-execute. So now let's go ahead and give it a try. So let's bring our browser, and if I take this and I move this to another account, to this account, and I'm going to say connect, and if you refresh the page, you see that your account now has been changed. So that's kind of a next step we want to do, is to watch for changes as well. When we switch account, we want to make sure that the page refresh, and that's something that we're going to implement in our decentralized app. But if you move this back into our main account here, and you see that this is your account 3C79, this is your balance rank B. But if I move this, and it's now saying your balance colon, move that back to rank B, and it should now change rank B. So there should be some sort of listener that every time we change this, it should also change what we have in all of these states. So the states that are from here, use states, right? This whole function, this whole use effect function should re-execute. But when you first pass in account, what it does is that it says that if your account went from 0, which is the blank one, to first loaded, which is here, then this function should continue to re-execute, all right? So you can also think of a way of just maybe isolating this out in another use effect. Just do a bit of cleaning up, make sure that everything still works. But what I did was to remove load balance and load accounts from the use effect itself and just move them out. So here it's saying that every time account changes, meaning it go from 0, go from nothing to first being set, then go ahead and call load balance. So load balance should execute after that. Why? Because load balance, in the load balance function itself, it relies on the account being existent. So if that's the case here, then it makes sense that it should listen to the changes to account. So every time account change, it should change that and then rerun this get balance. So it makes sense that it should be its own use effect. So if you want to do it the first way, you can do it. If you want to do some sort of refactoring and make it the way that you see here, you can also have that. And maybe one other thing I like to do is to maybe change the decimal place a little bit, because right now it's pretty scary to see this entire chunk here, 160597. That's a lot of numbers there. So what I like to do is to just maybe divide that by 18, because 1 if is 10 to the power of 18 way. So instead of actually setting balance here, I could do something like this, and I can say divide by 1e18. All right, so let's save that, and now it's a lot better. So it's now 1.6059, but I probably want to have this in maybe 4 decimal points. So how do I do that? We can do that by grouping them into one and then just say 2 fixed. So, and here is the decimal point. So number of digits after the decimal point must be in the range of 0 to 20. So you can have up to 20, but I would probably want something like 3 or 4, maybe 4, and I'll save that. And if I go back to my browser, now it's updated 1.6060. Okay, that's good. Account is still correct, 3C710606. All right. If we try and log into a different network, Coven for example, and refresh the page, you see that there's 0.4105. Okay, cool. One thing to note about the get balance itself is that you can actually also pass in something like a block number here. You can say, okay, what is the default block, the block number itself? I can ask for the balance of my account at block number 2 or block number 3 or at certain blocks. I think the default is actually just latest. I think that's, let me save it. Yep, that's the default. So this is still gonna be the default value anyway, but there are some predefined
sort of block numbers that you can pass in here. For example, like latest is one of them. This is the default value. You can also have like pending. You can say, what about, I want to see that, what is my balance, pending blocks. You can also say earliest. So let me change that, earliest. If I save that, you see that there are changes in here. The earliest is going to be 0.000. So that means when I started this account, I have no balance, and that's the earliest. So you can change that back to pending, save that, whoops, save that, and it changes as well. And I change that to latest, and it updates that as well. So there are a lot of things you can do with this web3.js that we really haven't explored, and that's kind of the goal of this playlist, is that I want to create this new track that talks about the different things you can do with web3.js, and especially we're also going to look at the useDapp. We haven't got to look at that yet, but we installed that already. So my goal is to actually create a whole playlist of just creating this decentralized applications, dApps, using web3.js, using useDapp, combining that with React, so you have a decentralized application that your customers, your users could play around and interact with, that is powered by smart contract, so that they can log in with their web3 wallet and they can make transactions. And that is one way of taking a smart contract to life and making it available for mass consumption. So make sure you subscribe for future episodes in this playlist, and thank you for joining me.